of the industry in South Africa to develop a national ventilator project. And this work was coordinated by South African Radio Astronomy Observatory, Sarajevo. This is the team that's been building the 64-dish array meerkat in the Karoo, but because of their expertise to put together different components in engineering type projects, they were then asked to coordinate this work. And then by the end of September, we had already 20,000 ventilators that were delivered. I think this graph just shows you both the management team and what they were doing, the industry design team, including SAHPRA playing a role, as well as the industry production team. And on the right-hand side, you can actually see the actual ventilator that was developed by this team, generating or delivering 20,000 units by end of September last year. This is a testimony that we got from a team that was working at Charlotte Maxeke, Johannesburg Academic Hospital, around the value that they derived from these ventilators. As you can see, they were expressing appreciation to the rest of the team who developed these machines, that they had an enormous impact on our patient outcomes between the first and the second wave. And the rest you can read for yourself, coming from Professor Adam Ishmael Kala, Dr. Stacy, and the rest of the COVID team. So at this point in time, of course, there is an attempt to see whether these ventilators can now be industrialized and be exported to the rest of the continent. I did indicate to you the work that was done by the surveillance of the genome. So this is the network that was pulled together. You can see CRISP at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Bloemfontein, Tygerberg, UCT, and NICD in Joburg. And then they were starting to look at how first of all, where the virus came from, its origin, and also where the virus come from. So this is the work that they do, where they look at 2,800 SARS-CoV-2 whole genomes from South Africa that were produced to date. And this information was used to understand how the epidemic started in South Africa, and completed 4 outbreak investigations in large hospitals in those provinces that you can see. And then it started with a weekly online training program with the Africa CDC to increase data analysis knowledge. And then there were some funders that supported this work going forward. What I think is one of the key outcomes of this network for genomic surveillance was the announcement they made in December 2020, where they talked about the emergence and rapid spread of a new SARS-CoV lineage with a number of spike mutations and delineation. This is what is now popularly known as this the variant that I think is called 501YV2. And then they continued with future studies to gather data on whether there is any clinical and epidemiological evidence to suggest impact of increased transmissibility, pathogenicity, and escape from neutralizing bodies. They have done further studies. One of the studies that they did, and they have published this, I think, early this year, was the study that looked at they took the blood from people who had the second, were infected by COVID-19 during the second wave. And then they looked at that blood sample to see whether the neutralization was happening to people who had firstly infected in the first wave and the people who were infected in the second wave. And I think it's public knowledge now to know that they found that the lineage that they had found for the 501YV2 was having certain properties and antibodies that seem to neutralize both the first and the second wave infected people. And this is now a very interesting further study that then could be used to see how you can develop vaccines around understanding those antibodies. We also spend a bit more time looking at the survey work, and then there were 2 studies that were done. The health worker survey, which was done during wave 2 by the Human Sciences Research Council, that looked at how the health workers were being affected by the work that they were doing during COVID. And this was very useful to inform the Department of Health about the health workers' feel and experience in their work environment during this period. We also, late last year, early this year, a public survey with the focus on vaccines to find out whether people would be willing to get involved in vaccines or not. And this study was again recently published, HSRC working with the University of Johannesburg, where we indicated that about 48%, I think roughly, people were fine with the vaccines. And there was quite a large number that was not sure. And then I think about a third of the population said they would not get involved in vaccines at all. We also have been looking at other R&D capacity that exists within the system. Now, there are 2 of these. The one which I will talk to about later on is the work that we started to do to look at why have we not been able to develop our own vaccine capability. And I will share with you a couple of slides on this work. And then I've already, maybe I haven't mentioned that the CSIR has been working with the Department of Health to develop the electronic vaccination data system, the system that is used for individuals to register for the vaccine. I will not go through this slide, but it's a slide that tries to give maybe more than just what I have given you on the work that we have done. I have mentioned some of these activities: tax rank use for Gauteng response plan, small business impact study, the impact on Northwest economy study during the time of the pandemic, pulmonary delivery systems, face mask, sanitizer through the stations that we use. So I will leave this, and as I say, we can pick this up during the Q&A. Now, on the vaccine work, I just want to indicate one initiative, and it's one of many, where the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research and DBSA has been working with this company, Kentucky Bioprocessing, to look at the possibility of localizing vaccine technology from the institution. And they've been considering, or consideration being given to looking at doing some clinical development in South Africa as part of potential technology transfer, adjusting, of course, the technology for new variants. And the approach is necessary given the strain variation that could impact the efficacy of some of the current vaccines. So they had to do so. And the KBP technical team at the time was engaging with SAHPRA, clinical trial expert, to see whether this could be done. So that we have been looking at some partners that have been doing some activities in the vaccine technology development, and this is one of them. Secondly, we've been looking as the department on building capacity for future pandemics, because one of the observations during this period is that South Africa has pockets of excellence in the vaccine development, but we haven't pulled this together in order to see whether we can develop vaccines. So the One Health National Vaccine Prototype Platform that harnesses national expertise in developing vaccine prototypes for human and animals is underway, and we have started to look at how best South Africa needs to pull this consortium together. We've also been harnessing African traditional medicine platform that we have been investing in order to see whether they can also be part of this expertise that we need, both for the current and for the future. And to that effect, this slide just shares with you some of the work that we did with African medicines practitioners, organizations, universities, and science councils, where we had approximately 7 monoherbs and 2 multi-herbal formulations that were selected for a number of studies that you see on the slide. So we have also worked with African medicine practitioners to try and look at capacity. Again, this continues in terms of the progress that have been made on the work that we did with Mr. Nkabinde that demonstrated activity on some receptors indicating a specific inhibition of entry of the virus into cells. Toxicity work and safety studies were also positive, so this is work in progress. Pela herbal mixture also demonstrated anti-SARS-CoV without toxicity from Free State, and 4 monoclonal herbal formulations also demonstrated 2 properties without toxicities from studies done at UPCSR and University. So we can look at a range of these studies, and we continue to support this work as part of our mandate as the TSI. And then lastly, as a result of this, we set up this National Policy Data Observatory. What we learned was that during COVID, whilst it's useful to have data on what's happening in the health area, it is probably important for us to pull together as the state, government departments and agencies in order to provide opportunities for these government departments to better coordinate and communicate complex data sets and analytics in multidimensional perspective. For instance, you wanted to understand the interface between vulnerable communities and the pandemic in that area. And this is what this data observatory that we have now set up has been doing. So these are some of the products to date that is coming out of the observatory. For instance, COVID-19 provincial and district daily stats, including trends, testing and strategies, district profiles, mobility reports, and these were very, very useful to monitor curfews and restriction. In fact, during the second wave, this was the studies that were used to find out where these increase of infections were coming from. So these are the products that we've started to develop that are helping during COVID. Thank you very much, Busha. I might have gone 2 or 3 minutes outside the time. I sincerely apologize. Thank you very much. I will stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Dr. Filmdracha, the Director General of the Department of Science and Innovation. We do appreciate the presentation. I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome the General Manager, Jos Charles, for the National Press Club. Are you here? Are you here?
Yes, indeed, I'm here.
Okay, so let me just hand over to and welcome. Apologies with the little hindrances earlier. Welcome.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much for the welcome. I appreciate it, and I also apologize for the earlier miscommunication. It's a pleasure for the National Press Club to be part of this process in partnership with the GCIS. As this deadly disease spread its tentacles, the role of science and research in providing up-to-the-minute information became very crucial and also helped to trust people qualified in economic research, immunology, virology, epidemiology, and academics to become the go-to people, and rightly so. And so this webinar this morning comes at the right time. This engagement between GCIS, the department, and SAHPRA, it comes at the right time in the opportunity to continue to demystify this virus. We are now going to have the next speaker, and that will be Dr. Simater. But before she comes in, may I ask that if there are any media colleagues online, may they post their questions on the media chat box, if they can identify themselves and also identify the media houses that they represent, and then post their questions in the chat box. And so we move on to the next speaker, Dr. Simater. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. And thank you for inviting SAHPRA to be part of this very important conversation. I think the DG has shared quite extensively in terms of the efforts that have gone in place. And, you know, for us as a regulator, it's always quite good that we see the plans that the country has, as we need to ensure that as we strive to be internationally and globally aligned, we also need to be locally relevant. And so we've been part of some of these engagements just so we keep abreast of the local developments. Specifically, I'll speak about vaccines and our role in vaccines, as well as the role we played with within diagnostic tests. So briefly, with vaccines, very important is the fact that South Africa participated in a number of these global vaccine studies that were ongoing across the world. We're very happy, that we as a regulator were able to expedite our processes and ensure that our scientific community participates in this. We were involved in vaccine studies for the AstraZeneca vaccine, for the Pfizer vaccine, the J&J vaccine at the moment, and there's a number of other studies that are ongoing. I think this is also reflective of the scientific stature of the country, and also reflective really of the capability that we have as a country in the area of clinical trials. And I think it's important for us as a regulator to ensure that we play our part in enabling the scientific community and the research community to be able to participate in these studies. In the review of vaccines, we look at three critical elements, the first being safety, quality, and efficacy. When it comes to safety, again, very much aligned to these clinical trials, and that's why we were happy that South Africa was involved, because in the data that the applicants would provide to us as the regulator, there was also data that was made available, generated from South Africa. So South Africa contributed significantly in data that was generated by the pharmaceutical industry. So we would look at safety, we would look at efficacy. Again, a number of these clinical trials were phase 3A or phase 3B studies conducted in the country. And again, South Africa contributed to that global base of data. The key element that I'd like to spend some time reflecting on, linked to the theme of this webinar, is around the quality aspect of what we review. And when it comes to quality, that's where we look at the manufacturing processes of these vaccines. And it could be vaccines, it could also be therapies. And this is where we look at the quality of manufacturing practices. We look at alignment of that practices with international harmonized standards. And this is where I think South Africa can really play a big role. And as the DG indicated, we already have some companies that are playing a role here. There was mention of BioVac, the BioVac Institute, that already has some manufacturing capability, as well as now we've seen that J&J will be doing a fill and finish for the J&J vaccine. So there's already, some capability that is available that we need to build on as a country. I do think that with the strength that we have in clinical work, with the strength that we have in terms of the basic R&D, we have among the top universities in the country, in the world actually. If we are to strengthen our skill sets as a country and capabilities in this area of manufacturing, we will be able to fill the full value chain. And I think the Department of Science and Innovation has really made good strides in already initiating some of these discussions, but not only having these discussions, but we've seen some of the projects that have already been initiated. Again, with regards to manufacturing, there's different options that the country can access some of these technologies. And I'm also aware that the Department of Science and Innovation is involved in those conversations. And very important reflection we should have is when we look at pretty much most of these vaccines, they were developed in R&D environments. And these are the environments that we have in the country. If you look at the Pfizer vaccine developed by BioNTech with government investment, it indicates that we've got the elements of being able to build this capability locally and then be able then to partner with larger companies who will then assist with then the further downstream elements of the manufacturing processes. So I must say, I think we've got the right elements. It's about putting it all together and enabling that. For us as a regulator, we've also indicated to the various stakeholders that, we want to be part of enabling this. SAHPRA has been very clear recently that we want to play the role of an enabler in the sector. We say as a team that gone are the days where the regulatory process is a barrier in development. We want to be an enabler. We want to be able to engage with applicants even prior to them submitting their applications to us. We want to guide and indicate what are the regulatory requirements. So we're really open as SAHPRA to say we want to be an enabler to the country achieving its objectives of building local manufacturing capacity. That's if I can wrap up on the vaccine discussion. So as we speak, we have the Pfizer vaccine that has been authorized and it's available now for the national rollout, and the Department of Health is busy with, the rollout process and the procurement processes, etc. And then we also have the J&J vaccine that has the conditional market authorization. We're currently in the review process for the Sputnik vaccine, as well as the Sinovac vaccine. But also in addition to these, we've met with many other vaccine manufacturers and applicants and provided guidance in terms of what's required in our context. And very critical is the data to show efficacy against the 5012 variant. And again, it indicates, the speed that this variant was identified in the country. Again, it speaks to the very strong scientific stature that we have as a country. And we also are recommending to a number of these applicants that wherein they do not have such data, we recommend that they partner with our local scientific community. Lastly, I also want to reflect on the diagnostics test, particularly for COVID. And, this is an area where, from an innovation perspective and then from a market perspective, we always say the barriers of entry are not as stringent as what you would see with, say, vaccines as well as therapeutics. We saw early in the pandemic, an emergence of local, entities and companies that were developing diagnostic tests. We worked very closely with the National Reference Lab, being the NHLS, to ensure that we validate these tests. And I must actually say that we're one of the very few countries who initially we were very stringent around the types of tests that we authorize. And to date, we have not recalled any of these tests as they continue to perform well. Whereas when you look at other countries that had to recall these tests because of the limited rigor that they applied. And so for us as a regulator, we continue to ensure that the decisions we make are very science-based. But for us to be able to make those science-based decisions, we leverage on the broader scientific community in the country. As I've indicated, we worked with the NHLS, we worked with, even our external experts who are consultants to SAHPRA, and these are individuals in academia, etc. So the role that the DSI plays really in supporting this, in supporting the various projects in the country, the various universities and the science councils, is really critical in ensuring that even for us as a regulator, we are able to support the country. I'll pause here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Simater Mapapakela. Again, bringing to the fore the crucial role that an organization like yours has played in this process of fighting this deadly pandemic. Thank you for your insights and for highlighting that collaboration between yourselves and other interested parties. At this point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Musidi Mukele from the National Press Club, so that she can facilitate the question and answer session. Remember, if there are those who may want to ask and pose questions, please do so on the chat box. Kindly provide your name and the media house that you represent and continue to pose your question. Ms. Mukele, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chale, and good morning to all colleagues that have joined us for this particular webinar. I will start with the first two set of questions. One is directed to Dr. Mjwara, and the other one is directed to Dr. Boitumelo Simater. Dr. Mjwara, a question from Brian Sukutu, who is from The Citizen. His question is that how confident is Dr. Mjwara on whether South Africa has followed science in dealing with the COVID-19 outbreak, and whether science did work. And then the follow-on question, also from Brian Sokutu at The Citizen, is directed to Dr. Simater. And the question is, why has it taken so long for South Africa to build vaccine developing capacity? If I can hand over to Dr. Mjwara to respond to the first question, please.
Thanks very much. I will probably also give a short on the second question that is directed to Dr. Simater. I want to be clear what I'm responding to Mr. Sokutu, because all what we presented as a Department of Science and Technology was what we did as the Department of Science and Technology using science and the capabilities that we have built over a period of time in the science system to use data and data analytics to support the understanding of what was happening. Now, it's one thing to make a presentation about the scientific capability, which is what I did, and hopefully this is very, very clear in terms of the genomic surveillance, the data analytics, and some work that we did as part of therapeutics at the early days of the pandemic. So from the science side, this is what we did as science, and this is the capability I'm sharing with yourselves on what we did. Now, some of the work, yes, was taken up, but that's a slightly different process, and that's why I'm wanting to be careful about what I'm responding to. For an example, there is a structure which, for instance, is sitting in the Department of Health that supports the minister, which is called the Ministerial Advisory Council. Our job as the scientific community and as a department is to say, here is a platform, here is data. The data then gets used in decision making. Now, if that's what you're asking, I'm not able to answer that question because as a department, we don't serve on the ministerial advisory structure. And I don't know, even if the scientific capability is being used, it's the only, if you like, decision-making variable, because sometimes having worked in government, I do know that you get a scientific data, but when you make a decision for policy, it's not only the scientific data. So I hope that's very, very clear in terms of what we have done from the scientific capability and making that available to decision makers. How the decision makers use that information for decision making, I'm not able to comment on that. And then the second issue around why has it taken us so long, as Dr. Simater, but she will probably respond to this, is that we do have pockets of excellence, but I think we just haven't applied our minds on putting the various groups together in a coordinated fashion in order to pull the different competencies that we have. We don't have all the competencies, though. There are still gaps that we have identified in the work that I said we're doing, and we are now in the next 18 months or so looking at how best we can fill the gaps, either with technology partner or research partners, in order to make sure that we are ready for the next pandemic. So, Mr. Sokutu, at the next meeting, you can hold me accountable as to why we haven't responded as quickly as perhaps we ought to. Thank you very much.
Simater, if we can perhaps have you respond to the second question, which I will repeat. Why has it taken so long for South Africa to build vaccine developing capacity?
Thank you. And I mean, I think the DG has indeed covered it. And I just also want to add, that some capacity exists. But as the DG says, it's about strengthening some of the pockets. In some instances, it's about investing and developing certain pockets. And lastly, it's about putting it all together. So, I do think also that the country has seen this pandemic as an opportunity, really, to have a very clear national strategic intent for us to build this capacity. And that's a key element. There's clearly political will, there's clearly support from the national government, there's clearly supportive and from us as a regulator. And I think just being able to, as a country, articulate that strategic intent is already sending the message, to innovators, to the scientific community, and even to investors, to say South Africa is ready for this. South Africa wants to invest in this capability. Thank you.
Next, what we have is actually a comment which comes from Nyeleti Mtombeni from the South African Clinical Research Association, where she says, I would like to make a note that SAHPRA will also be celebrating Clinical Research Professional on the 20th of May of 2021, International Clinical Trials Day, where we will have engagement from investigators, research science sites, sponsors, and clinical research organizations that participated in clinical trials. We think SAHPRA should collaborate more with the Department of Science and Technology, considering the role of the clinical research organization, the role that the clinical research organizations plays in scientific development in South Africa. And then Dr. Simater, I have a question, although I know you did touch on this in your opening remarks. It came from Anonymous, and the question says, what is South Africa's appetite, especially from a regulatory point of view, in working with the countries such as Russia on their Sputnik?
No, thank you. I mean, for us as a regulator, we engage.
We're going to come out of that webinar hosted by the GCIS. If you'll go back to all the COVID-19 responses in the past year, you will remember there was always an emphasis on leaning on scientific responses. So this gathering interrogating the extent, the outcomes, and the way forward to which science has played a role in mitigating the pandemic. Some of the takeaways for me: South Africa has the elements in place and capability to play a more meaningful role in the scientific development of vaccines and responses to COVID-19. Of course, Sinovac and Sputnik coming up yet again in terms of strong consideration to the South Africa vaccine mix. Of course, at the moment, only Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer being in use. The South Africa Health Products Regulatory Authority, the regulator, says they're concerned about safety, quality, and efficacy as they engaged with the vaccine development process, including clinical trials. They're of the view that South Africa should actively play a role in the vaccine manufacturing space, and the Department of Science and Technology, including there why, in terms of concerns about why South Africa hasn't been able to develop its own vaccine, outlining some of the work that has been done by the different stakeholders, including the Council for Scientific Research and a traditional medicine platform being interrogated, being explored as well, talking about 7 monoherbs that they're looking at. That's what's come out of that gathering. You're still watching the